Hello friends, before listening to the story of an old racist policeman attacking Keanu Reeves in court, turning pale when he found out his real identity, please help the Heroic Act Story for channel to grow by liking, positive comments, and subscribing. Hopefully those who support Chanel will become the best human beings. Let's continue with the story. Racist old cop attacks Keanu Reeves in court, turns pale when he finds out his real identity. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with tension. Reporters filled the benches, their cameras ready to capture every moment. At the defendant's table sat Officer Frank Delaney, a retired cop in his late 60s with a permanent scowl and hands that had gripped power for far too long. He had spent decades walking the thin blue line, bending the law when it suited him, confident that he was untouchable. Today, however, he wasn't the one in control. Across from him sat a man who had yet to speak. A man with long black hair tied back, dressed in an elegant black suit, his presence commanding without a single word. Keanu Reeves. Delaney didn't know why the guy looked familiar, but it didn't matter. To him, all that mattered was that this nobody had dared to stand against him. The prosecutor stepped forward. Officer Delaney, do you deny attacking the plaintiff in this very courthouse last week? Delaney scoffed, leaning back in his chair. I was doing my job. I saw a suspicious-looking guy loitering near the judge's chambers. When I asked him to leave, he got mouthy, so I encouraged him. Encouraged him? The prosecutor raised an eyebrow. By slamming him against the wall and calling him a street thug? Delaney smirked. I did what I had to do. The prosecutor clicked a remote, and a video appeared on the courtroom screen. The footage showed Delaney grabbing Keanu, shoving him hard against the marble wall, and hissing something into his ear before stepping back, looking smug. The courtroom gasped. The audio played next. You people don't belong in places like this, Delaney's voice sneered through the speakers. Get lost before someone makes you. Silence fell. Delaney shifted in his seat, his face still locked in defiance. I didn't know who he was, he muttered. Keanu finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. That's the problem, isn't it? Delaney's smirk faltered. Something about Keanu's voice, his presence, it was unsettling. The prosecutor cleared his throat. Officer Delaney, do you know who the plaintiff is? Delaney rolled his eyes. Some rich guy who thinks he's better than the rest of us. The prosecutor took a step closer. This is Keanu Reeves. Delaney frowned. So? The prosecutor leaned in. Formerly known as John Anderson, son of Officer Samuel Anderson. Delaney went pale. Samuel Anderson? His voice cracked. Keanu nodded. My father. The courtroom erupted, gasps, whispers, a wave of shock swept through the room. Delaney's hands shook as he gripped the table. He had worked with Samuel Anderson decades ago. They had been beat cops together, until Samuel had turned against the corruption in the department. He had spoken out, tried to expose the truth. And then, he had disappeared. Delaney stared at Keanu, the memories rushing back. That's not possible, he muttered. Your father, he left town. Keanu tilted his head. Did he? Delaney felt cold. The walls of the courtroom felt like they were closing in. He had been part of the cover-up. He had been one of the officers who made sure Samuel Anderson was never heard from again. And now his son sat across from him. The prosecutor stepped forward. Officer Delaney, would you like to revise your testimony? For the first time in his life, Frank Delaney was speechless. Keanu leaned in slightly, his dark eyes locked onto Delaney's. I'm not here for revenge, he said quietly. I'm here for justice. Delaney swallowed hard, feeling something he hadn't felt in decades. Fear. The courtroom remained silent, the weight of Keanu's words pressing down like a heavy fog. Delaney's face had gone ghostly white, beads of sweat forming on his wrinkled forehead. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His mind was racing. He had spent decades burying the truth, convincing himself that the past was dead. But now, it had come back to haunt him. The prosecutor turned to the judge. Your Honor, given the new information about Officer Delaney's connection to the plaintiff's father, we request a full investigation into his past cases, especially those involving missing persons. The judge nodded. Motion granted. Officer Delaney will remain in custody while further inquiries are made. Delaney's mouth finally caught up to his panic. This is ridiculous. You can't do this to me. I was a cop for 40 years. The bailiffs approached, ready to escort him out, but he turned toward Keanu, his desperation bleeding through his voice. Listen, kid, you don't know what you're getting into. Your father, he wasn't innocent. He was a traitor. He was gonna ruin everything we built. Keanu stood up slowly, his presence overshadowing the crumbling man before him. My father believed in the truth, and the truth has a way of coming out, no matter how long you try to bury it. Delaney lunged forward, rage replacing his fear. You think you're some kind of hero? He spat. You think you're better than me? Keanu didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned in and whispered, just loud enough for Delaney to hear. I don't have to be better than you. I just have to be different. Delaney's knees nearly buckled as the bailiffs grabbed his arms. He was dragged from the courtroom, his protests fading into the echoes of the hallway. The cameras flashed, reporters scrambled for their headlines. But Keanu didn't wait for the media circus to begin. He turned, walked calmly out of the courtroom and disappeared into the city. The case against Delaney sparked a wave of investigations. Files were reopened, witnesses came forward. One by one, the skeletons of the past emerged from the shadows, and the once untouchable cop became the face of a broken system. Weeks later, as Keanu stood by the ocean watching the sun dip below the horizon, he reached into his pocket and pulled out an old photograph. A man in uniform smiled back at him, his father, Samuel Anderson, before the system had swallowed him whole. Keanu exhaled, the weight of years lifting slightly from his shoulders. Justice had finally caught up with the past, and the future? That was his to shape.